Well, Catherine, I'm so glad that you agreed to be on an interview and chat like this with me. I caught your interview with Tucker Carlson, and it's just so serendipitous. I mean, it came out just a few days after Zero Hedge and the Beef Initiative launched and announced our partnership. Um, and it's so interesting because your conversation, I mean, you pretty much explain exactly why and what has necessitated this partnership between Zero Hedge and any type of private finance or equity, right? And the Beef Initiative. And I was thinking, gosh, you could probably explain the need for this better than I could, even at this point.
Well, this came up. I was an investment advisor for 10 years, and I'm not an investment advisor any longer. We turned that company into an investment screen company. But it started very early on because someone who had 10 or $15 million in their brokerage account would tell me they can't afford organic or biodynamic food. And I would just be shocked. I would say, "Are you crazy? You're financing the national security state through your brokerage account, which is trying to control you and destroy your food supply. And meantime, you're eating food as one ally said to me recently, have you priced out the cost of cancer lately? So I said, look, whatever money you have to spend on first making sure you and your family are healthy is absolutely essential. And it's more than just, okay, I'm going to go down to the farmer's market and buy the right food, or I'm going to go to, I'm going to join a CSA. It's more than just that. Because if you look at what's happening in food and farming, many of us, if we have capital, should be financing and building long-term relationships with our farmers and ranchers. That's the way to go. I'll never forget in 2012, I was having lunch in Zurich with a Swiss money manager, and he was all excited because a group of his allies had gone out, bought land, moved a farmer and his family from Eastern Europe to create a dedicated food supply just for them. And this was considered the great luxury asset of successful money managers, but they understood. They understood the health and well-being of my family is the basis of our family wealth. And the goal of our money is to support the assets, which are us, right? And if you look at what's happening, I think I told you one of our most popular issues, we publish 4 sort of big magazines a year to cover what I call primary trends. And we published one called Pharma Food, which is on lab-grown meat. And Breeauna, it was I'm someone who's famous for being able to read or deal with any kind of ugly truth. I couldn't finish it in one sitting. The draft it was written, we commissioned Elsa von Homelen to write it, and I got the draft and I said, "I just can't finish it one sitting. I have to put it down. I'll go to sleep. I'll get a massage. I'll take a sauna. I'll do, and I'll read it. I'll finish it tomorrow." And when I finished it, I said to the team, "We're going to publish this, but no one will read this. It's so horrible." Well, it turned out it was one of our most popular issues because all the fresh foodies, including the ranchers, started giving it to people and saying, "This is why you need to pay attention." And it's not just purchase and finance the capacity you need. It's more than that. You need to be part of organizing and funding political efforts designed to protect your food supply. You need to do all these things because this is war. And if you want to win, you need to be healthy, and you're not going to be healthy unless you have the kind of dedicated food supply that you and your family need to be healthy. And
That's a
so,
great.
well, what I have to tell you, it's a great investment. It's a great investment. You just and if you sit down and you look at the price of being healthy and strong versus not, the economics are compelling, particularly if you have money sitting in, I'm the first person to love great companies or to love putting money in gold. But but you can't put money in those things until you make sure that you are strong and healthy, and that means good food, good water, good oxygen.
Well, and especially when so much of our economy is up and volatile, right? Um, would you agree that cattle provides a tangible asset and something more than just a food supply to
Absolutely. I mean, and I hate to say this because I love gold, but you put gold in a vault, it doesn't grow. You put cows in a field, and they multiply. They're the ultimate in increase. So I
Yeah.
remember talking to one rancher and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm sitting here with my feet up on the desk while the sheep and cattle outside, procreate and grow."
So, you had brought up Sir James Goldsmith,
Mhm.
and he's fascinating. What if he rose to such prominence that he ended up being the owner of, I think it was like the third largest food conglomerate in the entire world.
Right. He was basically a mega grocer, right?
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, he's really a fascinating gentleman. And, listening to his debates on hollowing out the middle class, I ended up writing an article on it because I just thought, goodness, this man knew exactly what was going on and has been warning us for decades now. And it makes me wonder, how many people are we selectively ignoring within our society? What is the next step? So I guess my question is, in a nutshell, how have we arrived in our current predicament where our cattle volumes are at a 70-year low, where our food security has been hollowed out and our middle class is gone? And so how have we gotten here? And then what is the goal for the next phase? And then again, how do we stop it
Right.
beyond just investing locally and buying a cow?
So we've watched as the people who run the central banking and governance system in the planet use new technology to centralize control. And that's what Sir James Goldsmith was talking about. And the centralization of political and economic power and it's continued for many, it's continued for my whole lifetime. And as the centralization of control happens, we see the deterioration of the quality of life in many different respects. Although, one could argue that globalization helped lift a lot of people out of poverty in the third world. And so there, it's a complex story. But I clearly the people running the system want to take digital technology to institute complete transaction control. And if they are able to achieve it, what we're talking about is the ability to turn our money on and off and to, as a result, decide every rule, across the board. It's basically just like the central bankers took control of monetary policy in 1913. This would give them complete control of fiscal policy. So they could decide literally when and where your money could work. So if you're locked down and you can't leave your house, your money won't work outside your house. If they don't want you eating pizza, you can't eat pizza.
Catherine, so this is the idea of the programmable currency that people like Bo Lee have at the
Right.
IMF.
Right.
Is that right?
Right. So Augustine Carson's at the Bank of International Settlements or BOLI at the IMF have explained, we can make the rules centrally on how you can use the Augustine Carson described it as this expression of central bank liability. In other words, it's our money, it's not your money. So we can set the rules on how you can use our money and we can enforce those rules centrally. What he was referring to is AI and software. And so literally we're talking about the ability to create a system, and we all know about the Chinese social credit system where I make up a list of rules and regulations for you as an individual, and I can do surveillance and track you and then offer you carrots and sticks. So if you're not good, I can literally take your children away if you
Mm.
don't do what you're told.
All our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general to the general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash, and there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
The second aspect that CBDC can help improve financial inclusion is because of its legal tender status. Because CBDC is an obligation of central bank. And the obligation of central bank is a legal tender in every country. So it is widely accepted. That creates potential value for everyone to use it. And finally, the third way we think CBDC can improve financial inclusion is through what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contract, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized. For example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support. So that way can also improve financial inclusion.
We're talking about the most invasive form of tyranny, that has ever existed on the planet. And what has been happening is this it's sort of the system has been tightening around each one of us, but it's now coming to the point where it's becoming more visible. A lot of people kept thinking, "Oh, I can live with this. I can get along. I don't mind if the NSA is tracking me, or I don't mind if they debank me for this or that. I can always go to another bank." Now we're talking about getting into something that's complete control. And of course, you can't control the money in this way unless you can control the food supply. So,
In
it's
lands, right? And the amount of land that's available or who
right,
who is allowed to
right,
buy and own
right.
land and property.
So the push is definitely on to pick up and centralize ownership and control of land. And
Mm.
that's one of the things, we worry about when we go through a period where you're experiencing the kind of stagflation that we're experiencing and could get much worse as a result of tariffs, is that's the perfect opportunity where the people who can print money can finance themselves grabbing a lot of land, as they did during the pandemic.
That makes absolute sense. Well, and as they have on the back end of like disasters, right? During the Biden administration, with the implementation of the federal plan for equitable long-term recovery and resilience, there were billions of dollars that went out through NGOs, and they were set aside specifically for strategic buyout plans.
Right,
These strategic buyout programs that were administered by your, former agency, HUD, they outline not only expropriating land for open space or this concept of wildlands and wetland reserves, etc., but they also talk about the expropriation of land and these regional buybacks to ensure that there's conformity, right? And people
right.
are they call it community driven relocation, which is a really interesting way for saying, forced removal into the smart city, or what they call the resilient city
Right.
now.
You always want to market something which is controlling and extracting as we're helping you. So one of my favorites, I don't know what's happened to it, is the Sustains Act, because you're basically saying, we can define processes that are occurring on your private land, and we can assign corporate control of those processes and essentially regulate you into the ground is what we're talking about.
Well, and we've already seen it. I would say, especially in the last 20 years, maybe before that, right? Maybe with the Chevron deference ruling and really the full embrace of Chevron doctrine within the administrative apparatus. We have certainly seen corporatism, right? Selectionism and protectionism, where rules apply for some, um, but others there are selected upon their ideological either alignment with the administration or potentially what they have to offer in terms of monetary value. They are shielded, they're protected from the
Right.
regulatory burden that applies to the rest of us. And it creates this very um, easy way to corner markets and sort of edge out competition. But now, what you're talking about is something tenfold that, right? When you're talking about smart contracts and programmable money, you can put your thumb on an individual and write rules for one person that don't apply to anybody else at all,
Right.
ever.
Right. Right. The control is one person at a time. And not to say that they won't apply to niches or do things in batches, but the goal is to extract as much value as possible and do it in a way that gives you complete control.
Here's what you say just on the flyleaf. Just on the cover. Despite an expanding economy, violence increases, the number of those living in poverty grows, and urban slums spread in cities throughout the world. There is a growing realization that something fundamentally has gone wrong and a pervasive feeling that those in power do not know what should be done. So there's this question, what is fundamentally wrong?
You see, because obviously Europe and America are extremely similar. Very similar problems. Development of slums, breakdown of families, drugs, crime. All those problems which we all know are the fundament of a problem, but they're symptoms of something. They didn't come about on their own. They're symptoms of a basic disease. You take GATT, you'd think that everybody in the third world would say, this is phenomenal. We're going to be able to become the manufacturing base for the first world. We're going to be able to suck in their jobs, export products to them, and we're going to benefit. But in fact, 1 million people went out in India to campaign, to protest against GATT in the streets, led by a remarkable woman called Mrs. Shiva, Professor Shiva, remarkable woman, Sandana Shiva. Now, they look around and they see the West and they see the mess we've made with economic growth. They see that we've, as I said before, uprooted the countryside, bloated the towns, destabilized the towns, and created terrible, terrible chaos for ourselves. And they want to avoid it. And they say that GATT, the purpose of which is to create what is known today as efficient agriculture and to impose it worldwide. Now, let me just give you one aspect of GATT on the third world. The idea of GATT is that the efficiency of agriculture throughout the world should reach the most efficient. That sounds logical, to produce the most amount of food for the least cost. But what does that really mean? An economist will say that's obvious, the most amount of food for the least cost. But what is cost? When you intensify agriculture, and you reduce the number of people on the land, what happens to those people? They're chased into the towns. They lose their job in the land. If they go into the towns, there's no jobs. There's no infrastructure. The social costs of those people, the financial cost of the infrastructure, has to be added to the cost of producing food. If you want to have the real cost of food.
I understand your argument.
On top of that, that's just economics. And economics should not be the whole argument. On top of that, you're breaking families. You're uprooting them. You're throwing them into the slums. Do you realize that in Brazil, the favelas did not exist before the Green Revolution of intensifying agriculture?
But before you go down this road too long...
No, let me just add one word, and I'll move off this wing. Just one final example. In the world today, there are 3,100 million people still living in rural communities. 3.1 billion.
Right.
If GATT succeeds, and we're able to impose modern methods of agriculture worldwide, so as to bring them to the levels, say, of Canada or Australia, what would happen? 2,000 million people out of those 3,100 million people, straight arithmetic calculation, would be uprooted from the land and chased into the towns. Now, throughout the world,
with all of the destabilizing impact that it will
and
have.
you've seen it.
Here's my
It's
point.
the greatest single disaster. It's much more disaster, great more disastrous than any
So
war
what's
we've
your
had.
answer then?
We have to change priorities. The purpose, let's take agriculture. Instead of just trying to produce the maximum amount for the cheapest direct cost,
Yes.
let us try and take into account the other costs. Our purpose should not be just one-dimensional cost of producing food. We should take into account that we want the right amount of food, of the right quality for health, of the right quality for the environment, and employing enough people so as to maintain social stability in the rural areas.
Let me ask you this.
If not, and we chase 2,100 million people into the slums of the towns, we will create, on a scale unheard of, mass migration. What we saw in Rwanda of 2 million people will be nothing. So as to satisfy an economic doctrine, a piece of economic thinking, which, by the way, started in 1819 and was based on totally different ideas, which was Mr. Ricardo's ideas, we would be creating 2 billion refugees. We would be creating mass waves of migration which none of us could control. We would be destroying the towns which are already largely destroyed. Look at Rio, look at Mexico, look at our own towns. And we're doing this for economic dogma because we've got to get it done by the end of December. We can't wait another year or two to see the result. Otherwise, some political gimmick like fast track will go out of the way. What is this nonsense? Everything is based in our modern society on improving an economic index. How do we get greater economic growth? How do we grow GNP? And the result is we are destroying the stability of our societies because we are worshipping the wrong god, economic index.
So when they say, it's 2030 and you have no assets, you're designing a digital transaction system that can achieve that.
Yeah, it's not the you'll own nothing part of that promise. It's the you'll be happy. That's the part that really sends chills down my spine because, I've owned nothing before in my life. That's fine. I can get through that. But it's the not being, it's the sort of threat that comes with you'll be happy that
Right,
scares me.
right. I think we just finished doing, Patrick Wood led them, 2 symposiums called Omnivore. So David Hughes, we just published David Hughes's big study, Omnivore, on the Solari report. And Omnivore is about the weaponization of everything. But in these 2 symposium, David Hughes and Lissa Johnson and Daniel Brody cover the kind of high-tech mind control that's being applied. So when they say be happy, it means we reserve the right to pump out on the digital systems entrainment and subliminal programming that essentially manipulates you into doing what we want or going along with what we want or punishing you if you don't go along with what we want. So you're talking about very high tech. The last symposium was called Battle for the Brain. And I first came to this because when I became an investment advisor, I discovered they were using entrainment technology to try and market fraudulent investments to my clients. And, I've come to believe that in a lot of the cyber and internet crime or fraudulent investment space, there is a lot of use of these kinds of technologies to get people to do things which are certifiably financially insane. And on the Solari report, I did our first interview on this kind of technology was, I think it was in 2010. And I did it literally because I had so many clients who were having this marketed to them, either by phone or internet. And literally, I couldn't talk them out of doing things that were just going to lose them huge amounts of money unless I persuaded them as a factual matter that this kind of technology existed and was being used. So,
Wow.
well, but you get these situations where if I go to a legitimate precious metals dealer, I can buy 90% silver for 2.5% over spot, but I'm getting marketed something for 24% over spot price. And a perfectly well educated, intelligent client prefers spending 24% over. That's insane. That you get those kinds of situations.
Yeah, that is nuts. But I think more people are starting to see it today, and I think certainly more people understand that that technology is not only exists but is in use today. Um, so how do we spot it, right? Like how do we avoid going into this trap or ending up in this digital, panopticon as you have outlined?
So there are many things we can do. One thing that really helps is eating fresh, healthy food. In other words, for you to remain coherent and be strong and deal with any aspect of this, whether it requires physical energy or mental energy, you need to be healthy and you need to not be eating poison. So, I want to bring it back to the beef initiative. It starts with the basics, fresh food, you know, clean water, as much clean air as possible. And I hate to say this as somebody who built their business around screens and recording this on the screen, the more time you can spend outdoors and away from the screens, the better. We just finished publishing a really deep dive looking at how to protect yourself from financial fraud. And what I would say is it's very important to not make impulse decisions,
Mm.
to make sure you have complete intellectual mastery of what you're considering and doing, and to sleep on it. Never make a decision online, get offline, take out a blank sheet of paper, make sure you can explain it to a 7-year-old, do the numbers. Math is a great killer of mind control. Do the math and show exactly how the math works, and then go walk in the woods, hug a tree, make your decision away from where that technology can reach you. Now with SpaceX and all this other stuff, in theory, it can reach you anywhere. I really find it helps to talk things through with friends who are interested because one of the things, for example, I discovered when I was an investment advisor is it's relatively easy to trick a man and it's relatively easy to trick a woman. It's almost impossible to trick a man and woman working together. Between the
Mm,
two of them,
mhm.
they seem to cover the waterfront, and it's much harder for a bad investment decision to get by two of them working together.
So forget the FOMO. Just let go of the FOMO. Take a deep breath, get centered, have deep conversations, and do some math.
Right, and stay and emotion. This should be investment decisions, financial decisions should come from, very basic logic. They shouldn't come from emotion. If somebody's putting you in fear, get away from them. Anybody who starts off with, too much fear or too much hope or too many promises, get away from them.
That's a really good point. We're seeing some really alarming things happening within the cattle industry, and especially, and it hits close to home because we want people to buy a share of a herd. We want people to buy a cow, but we want them to own it. We want them to take tangible ownership of not only that cow, but then their own food supply and their health.
Right.
We want them to
Right.
take back control. And we're starting to see these sort of bad actors, but it's a lot deeper than that, honestly, because there's entire layers that should have raised red flags that didn't. But like the ghost cattle eh, situation out of Kentucky and Texas, there is another one that just popped up out of Uruguay, for example. um, there these banks and these individuals are able to move a lot of money by claiming that the asset exists, but they're just using like a digital number for that asset. And that's the thing that's moving, whether it's GPS enabled, whether it's RFID. Uruguay, for example, was the first country ever to mandate EI, RFID, not just EID, ear tags. And so it's supposed to be this foolproof system, but wouldn't you know, you've got these, herds that are supposed to be 480,000 head of cattle, and all it is a bunch of EID or RFID ear tags sitting in a box somewhere in a field, and this is their proof of an asset. So one, this is hollowing out, once again, this is hollowing out lending and available liquidity within agricultural markets, but it's destroying trust too,
Right.
within the cattle industry. And potentially there's even more longer term effects, being that we don't have the inventory that we once thought we even did.
So
So
I just have to tell you one of my favorite quotes is from a Swiss doctor. He said, "The currency of the future will be relationships of trust."
amen.
And we're in a world where we're all going to have to start, back at ground zero, and we're going to have to work through relationships of trust. And if you don't know a player, you have to know that somebody has integrity, and somebody of integrity has to swear that next guy has integrity, and you have to follow that chain of trust. And if you don't know that somebody has integrity, you have to assume they don't.
Absolutely. And I think a really important way to establish that is to shake their hands and look someone right in the eyes
Right.
and create a relationship. That's what we're all about at the Beef Initiative, and I know that's what you're all about at the Solari
Right.
report as well. And I just want to thank you so much for your time, for your integrity, for your honesty, for your ethics, your leadership, and your guidance. And we're very grateful for your mind and everything that you have contributed to this country and to our generation. So
Well,
thank you
we're
very
very grateful for you because we love great beef.
much. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and I look forward to our next interview.
Thank you, Breeauna. Let's do it again, shall we?
Yes, ma'am.
We have stolen the voice of the great American rancher, farmer, and producer. We've destroyed the health of a nation. The multinational processing centers hijack 85% of the protein in the United States of America by 4 multinational processing centers. We are the Beef Initiative, and we're bringing you beef intelligence in a way that's never been done before.